the strategic Bitcoin reserve is the most sensitive element of the administration's crypto policy writ large, because I think it's seen by certain folks in the Treasury Department, maybe some folks at the White House, as kind of being the most kind of nonlinear policy move, right? A lot of these other things, like the Genius Act, one everyone kind of understands, good for the dollar, good for America's debt servicing. Even Russia was sort of mad about how this might just be a
Yeah.
rug pull on the debt markets. It's like pretty obvious the strategy of externalizing financial repression and leveraging crypto networks, right, for US strategic purposes. If you look at history, right, like any shift in monetary reserve assets is usually driven by massive geopolitical upheaval, and it's taken as a matter of like the most serious national strategic decision making. And so you don't just kind of like inch your way into that. It's usually preconditions are set, and the political and geopolitical conditions have to be ripe for it to be a major move, right? It's not going to be as incremental as these other policy things where it's like, okay, lots of study reports, lots of congressional debate on different draft bills. It's going to be people putting a sort of Chekhov's gun on the table, and then everyone walks around and pretends the gun's not there until the end of Act Three, when America has to pick up the gun. And so the gun has been placed on the table, and all the characters are walking around and mostly ignoring it. But now it's there, and so it's less of telling like a linear progression story like you tell in these other policy legislative initiatives where things get introduced, things get debated. It's more like, okay, if the government is actually going to decide to acquire a meaningful amount of Bitcoin as a strategic asset beyond just sort of pure symbolic kind of political signaling, that is a 0 to 1 moment. You can't undo that. And the political and geopolitical conditions have to be ripe. And I think the objective assessment situation is right now, it's not a strategic necessity, right? I think we've made the case that it's prudent to acquire a meaningful position in advance of when it's a strategic necessity. But that's a normative argument to try to convince the government they should get ahead of what, is usually done in extremis, right? But, politics is politics, and geopolitics and the lessons of history tell us that usually these things happen when it's inevitable, right? The US was being drained of its gold for years before they realized, like, we have to rug pull everyone. And that happened on a weekend at Camp David, right? And so there are many people probably credibly making the case for years, I don't know, the system doesn't seem sustainable. And then 3 or 4 more years go by, right? Before the political and the geopolitical conditions trigger national leadership to get around the table on a weekend and decide to do something quite dramatic.